The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is no substitute for professional care by your doctor or your qualified healthcare professional. Never disregard or delay professional medical advice because of something you've heard on this podcast or in any linked material. Guests who speak on this podcast express their own opinions, experience, and conclusions. Dr. Shirley neither endorses nor opposes any particular opinion discussed on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, practice, institution, or other entity with which Dr. Shirley may be affiliated.
Welcome to Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty. This podcast is curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD, as the definitive source of holistic wellness through beauty.
This week's episode of the Forever Fab podcast is dedicated to confidence. The title of this week's episode is Supreme Beauty, Iconic Women and How to Lead Like One. Welcome to my interview with Marcellas Reynolds. Marcellas Reynolds is an American actor, author, documentarian, and television host. His notable television appearances include Access Hollywood, E! Live from the Red Carpet, The Bold and the Beautiful, Supreme Models, and Yes Dear. He began his television career in 2002 on CBS's hit television series Big Brother Season 3, and he has kept it moving since then. His writing has appeared in Chicago Magazine, Essence, The Guardian, and LA Style Magazine. Marcellas, most notably, is also the author of Supreme Models, Iconic Black Women Who Revolutionized Fashion. He has also penned Supreme Actresses, Iconic Black Women Who Revolutionized Hollywood, and Supreme Sirens, Iconic Black Women Who Revolutionized Music. He is also the executive producer of Supreme Models, the documentary. Marcellas was born in Chicago, Illinois. In 1994, he was discovered while waiting tables, this launching his illustrious modeling career. He went on to be represented by Ford Models, Beatrice Models in Milan, and Goodfellas Model Agency in London. He also modeled for The Gap, Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, Nautica, as well as the photographers Norma Jean Roy and Bruce Weber. In 2000, while modeling in New York, Marcellas began working as a fashion stylist. His list of advertising clientele includes H&M, Kohl's, Lord & Taylor, and Macy's. His editorial work has appeared in British GQ, In Style, and British Vogue. His list of past clientele includes Rebecca Hall, Jayma Mays, David Schwimmer, Sharon Stone, and JT, Justin Timberlake. In 2002, Marcellas began his career as an entertainment reporter and television host, working for BET, CBS, E!, Fox, and the Style Network. And he's not done yet. Marcellas joins me today via StreamYard on the Forever Fab podcast to discuss fashion, entertainment, style, and how to be iconic. Welcome, Marcellas. Congratulations on all of your success, and thank you for becoming a member of the beautiful Forever Fab community. How are you today?
I am fantastic today. I've got no complaints about anything. And I'm a complainer.
No. You know what? It's very interesting that you say that, because I'm going to have you retell the story of when we first met on the Meredith Vieira show. And when we met, we were in, the green room, which was actually quite a nice green room with a nice long table. And you had complaints. So I will not forget that. So remind me the story.
What was I complaining about that day? Because I don't remember, but I complained all the time. Was I complaining about the plane ride? Was I complaining about my hotel? Was I complaining about a boy? Was I complaining about my outfit?
No, your outfit was impeccable, of course. I believe you had a nice hotel room and the flight was fine. I think you were complaining about like the industry and getting paid.
Oh. I'm always complaining about my money, darling. complaining about the amount of money, the lack of the money. I'm complaining about the frequency of the money. I'm complaining about how quickly or how slowly I get paid. There's always a complaint about the money.
That's a whole other podcast, isn't it?
That is a whole other podcast. But I believe I was complaining about one of the best parts of the Meredith Vieira show is that it was a SAG set. And so you had to be a member of SAG if you were doing it often, right?
Yes,
and
I recall.
They paid my past due SAG dues, which was really kind of them.
Yes, actually.
But because they were SAG, there was always this thing where you had to like fill out this voucher and then you had to wait and yada yada. Like it just, it was just like, you know what, give me my money, just like give me my money. Don't tax it. Let's do a 1099. I'll pay my own taxes.
Right.
So there was always that. But the thing with the Meredith show, because I did it so frequently, and because they caught me up with my SAG, I got insurance through the Meredith Vieira show. I hadn't had insurance through SAG in years.
In a long time. It's so sad that show was. I know. I had fun. It was a great show. It was responsible reporting and interviewing. It was fantastic.
Okay. Meredith was the kindest person in the world. She was so kind. And everybody came through those doors because she had that impeccable reputation, the way she treated people. I mean, I guess between the Today Show and was she on the original The View?
I don't recall, or maybe if not the original, then maybe one of the seasons afterwards she had a stint on it. I think so, but I'm not sure.
But within her CV, she had worked with everybody.
And
so her show had this amazing reach.
And gravitas, right?
Oh, gravitas. And she tried to keep it 100%. She tried to keep it above board. And I remember one day, I was just watching Regina King talking about the suicide of her son. And she was talking about grief. And it made me remember that the first time I met Regina King was backstage at the Meredith Vieira show. And I went running up to her and I was like, oh my God, I love you. I'm Marcellas Reynolds. And she was like, hey, I know who you are. And I swear I could have died in that moment and just fell out that Regina King knew who I was. You know what I mean? It was that energy. She was like, baby, I know who you are. How are you doing? And I was like, I'll never be this good again. Thank you very much.
Oh my God. You what an amazing experience. You totally answered one of my questions, which was going to come up later about, tell me about an epic, memorable celebrity experience. So we're going to get into these questions because I know you have so many stories. I can't wait. I was like chomping at the bit waiting for this interview.
But still ask me that question later because I've got several of those. So.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Darling. In Chicago, you went from waiter to model. How did you reconcile this in your mind? Did you always know that you were meant for the spotlight? Because here you are, taking orders and this, that, and the other. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, I'm going to be in front of millions of eyes tomorrow. How did that sit with you?
Well, the woman who discovered me was the same woman who discovered Cindy Crawford. Her name's Marie Anderson. And she had, without my ego being in it, she had an amazing eye for what was coming next in fashion. And so she saw me and she had an agency in Chicago that did very well. Before that, she was the vice president of Elite Chicago, which is, Elite, one of the biggest agencies in the world still to this day. Yes. She left, she started her own agency and she was looking for the next phase, the newer model, the quirkier model, the model with personality, the model that could speak, the model that just wasn't like one dimensional. You see them either on the runway or you see them in a magazine. She was looking for that model that was maybe a television host or maybe an actor that was like a personality. And I think she saw me and she saw maybe that in me. Yeah. But I always knew that I was destined for, my
greatness.
I was always destined for greatness. But my mother used to say you were born under the good moon, so you were lucky. Like she always would say that she'd like anytime something bad happens, you figure out a way to flip it into something good. And
Wow.
so because of that, I was always very optimistic. I
Yeah.
always knew that better was always coming.
That
So
is a gift.
it is a gift because I grew up poor. I grew up very unhappy. I grew up the child of abuse. I grew up
Oh,
bullied. I grew up, I did not have a great start to life. But even within those horrible times and those horrible circumstances, we were on welfare and never met my father, yada, yada, yada. I always felt like I was destined for something greater.
oh,
And that might have been my grandmother who like treated me like I was a little prince because I was the first
yes.
grandson out of 6 children. I was the first grandson. And so she always treated me like the heir to the throne, even though there was no
Yes.
throne. But I did grow up thinking I was going to be, I grew up thinking I was going to be famous. I grew up like watching the Oscars and I would do an
Wow.
Oscar speech. I grew up thinking that I was going to be a star. I grew up thinking that I was special and I needed to think like that to counteract all the times that I was told that I was not special
Oh my
by,
gosh.
you know,
Yeah.
my community and by the church because I was the little gay kid, by the
Hmm.
society because I was a little black man, a little black
Yes.
boy, a little black
Yes.
child. The
Yes.
society tells black men that they aren't worthy at every turn.
Yes.
So
Mm.
I always felt though that you a lie. I'm gonna be fantastic. You a lie. I'm magnificent.
Yeah. Right. My God. Oh my. I know you are a brilliant writer and you write about others, but that story that you just told me, everybody around the world listening to this podcast has heard it here first. You need to write your autobiography. I'm sure it would be so compelling.
Can I tell you that I think that I'm done with the Supreme series? So I have my 3 books. And I
Yes.
do think that my next book is going to be a work of fiction, but it is going to be a fictionalized version of my life. And I think it's going to be the story, it's going to be about a little black gay boy that comes from nothing and
Oh,
makes it super far in the world of fashion. And it's
oh
going to
my
be
gosh.
a melange of my personal story,
Yes.
Andre Leon Talley's story,
Oh my gosh.
maybe
God rest his
Willie
soul.
Willie Smith's
Smith.
story and Patrick Kelly's story because they died
Yes.
so early of AIDS, and
Yes.
about other stories that I'm privy to along the way. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the things that is the thread throughout my books is that I have been the sponge for other people's stories and I've
Hmm.
sort of banked them, right? I've been
Yes.
front row in a lot of worlds where I've seen things firsthand and I've put that in the back of my head for later
Yes.
use.
Yes.
And I think I don't think I'm ready to tell my own personal story, just straight
Okay.
out tell it, but I
Okay.
am going to tell it in
Through a different lens.
yes.
Oh, that was my little witchy sense. You see how that is it? Mhm. Okay. So, out of all of that, so back to your modeling, did you enjoy it? And what did modeling teach you about the world?
I loved every single moment of being a model. I grew
Yes.
up not feeling attractive.
Hmm.
I grew up, you know, in Black societies, and I hope that that's changing. But in my community, it was the lighter you were, the more attractive you were. And being
Mm.
somebody who's truly brown skinned, I wasn't thought of as attractive. Like, yes, my mother told me I was cute. My brothers told me, not my brothers, my grandparents told me I was cute, whatever.
Yes.
And I think that girls did tell me I was cute, but
Yes.
we were like kind of ranked in my school. And I was like at times the 4th or 5th cutest boy in my class.
Oh my
But the
gosh.
one that was always the cutest was a boy named Eric Fitzpatrick, who was like light skinned and had green eyes and blonde hair.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, Eric is cute, but I'm cuter. I mean, like that's how I always felt. So and then, I did get, once I got off the South Side and I sort of Chicago, and I
Yes.
got into the real world, I was told that I was attractive, and I did begin to believe I was attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like once I call it into the world of men, but when I say that, I mean into the world of like white people, honestly. But when I got into the world of men specifically, of the man. But when I got into the world of men, the gay world too, I was sort of sought after. So I did begin to believe that I was like more attractive. Through high school, I was told I was attractive. And then as I didn't go to college because I was working full time.
Yes.
And then, then I was told I was attractive, and my attractiveness was always sort of an asset.
Yes.
And I used it to my advantage. So when I got discovered to be a model, I was, thoroughly ready in that way to be a model. I was thoroughly ready in this idea that I'm attractive, that people think I'm attractive, but I was also happily smart and engaging.
Yes.
So I was the boy, because I was like this boy that was bullied. I was always the boy that was like trying to make friends. And I was always the boy that was like talking to everybody and blah, blah, blah. And that suited me very well in the new world of modeling. Because so often with men, they're standing around, they're not really talking, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I go to a casting, I'm talking to the other models, I'm talking to the casting director, I'm talking to the photographer, I'm talking to the client. And that served me well, because they thought that that's how I was going to be on set. That I was moving and joking and smiling and laughing and like light and airy. And that made bookings. And I loved it when I wasn't working. I loved it when I was working. There was a moment in like 96 to 97 where I got really close to the top tier of models in the world.
Wow, Marcellas.
And I was doing Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger and Nautica and The Gap, and I was shooting with Ralph Lauren and Norman Jean Roy and Darlene and all these great photographers. And I was doing like high-end catalogs like Saks and Neiman's and just working all the time. And I loved the travel, and I loved meeting new people, and I loved going to set and figuring out what I was doing that day, and how with the photographer and the hair and makeup and styling stylists, we could create something that was beautiful. And I loved pushing it, and I loved going further and making an image stronger, and I loved just all of it, every single aspect. I loved not working. I loved being in Milan, not working because it wasn't a Black boy market, and being like 9 to a 1-bedroom apartment and experiencing another country. I lived in London. I worked in Paris. I lived in Milan. I traveled all over the United States. I loved every single moment of it. And I grew up Black and poor. So when I went to Paris for the first time, I was like, oh my God, I'm living a dream.
Yes.
When I was walking down these like hundreds of year old streets in London, I was like, I'm living the dreams of my ancestors. My grandmother and grandfather and great grandmother and grandfather probably never even thought of like leaving the United States.
Right.
And here I am, not only out of the United States, but successfully out of the United States.
So it sounds as if all of this love that you have and experience is really gratitude. So if you could just use one word to describe what you are most grateful for from modeling, what is that one word? And there's a part 2 to that. If you could just use one word to describe what you are not so happy about from the modeling career, what would that one word be? So one word to describe how much gratitude you have for your experiences in modeling, and another word to describe what you wish you did not experience or was not so inherent in the industry, if that's applicable. Just one word each.
Vastness.
That's what you're grateful for.
What I'm grateful for.
Okay.
Vastness.
Got it.
Modeling just showed me how big the world was, how small the United States was really, even though when you look at an American globe, it's bigger than any other country. In reality, it's so much smaller than any other country. So there's a vast world out there, and the vastness of it is beautiful.
Yes.
Vastness.
Okay.
What wasn't I happy about with modeling? Racism.
Yeah. I imagine at your time it was quite evident or definitely in place.
I mean, you'd go to an agency, and this was across the board for Black men, Black women, and you'd have your book, or clearly you thought you were cute because you were even trying to be a model.
Yeah.
And so often agents and agencies would say, well, we already have a Black girl, or we already have a Black guy. And you look at the board and they'd represent like 200-300 people, but they all thought that they only needed one Black person.
Yeah.
Or, and so often you were told, not so much with boys, but my girlfriends, it was like, these girls are like a size 0, a size 2, a size 4. But still they're being told their hips are too big, their lips are too wide, their skin is too dark, their skin is too light, their hair is too nappy, their hair is too straight. Like you're never enough.
Yes.
And so it's like all of that stuff there was based upon race. Yeah. And all of the ease with which these people would tell you what was wrong with you, or tell you why you weren't enough, was based in race. So it's racism.
Yeah.
And I would pack those stories that I would hear from girls, from boys, and things that happened to me personally. I packed them away. And those are the stories that inform my work to this day.
Well, thank goodness for Beth Ann Hardison, who revolutionized change. But despite that, do you think that sort of racism or selectivism is still evident in modeling today?
Yes. I think there's always going to be this idea of, George Floyd died to change the world. And so the pandemic happened, the protest happened, George Floyd happened.
Yeah. January 6th happened.
January 6th happened. So many things happened in the span of a really quick time that it did change the discussion about Blackness. And I think people wanted to understand more about why Black people were so angry, why Black people, quote unquote, have a chip on their shoulder, why Black people are always trying to take society, American society and global society to task. Yeah. And so I think we have to be grateful for those challenges that we faced. Yes. But I also think, and this is something that I'm seeing in fashion, that the pendulum is swinging back. The door opened and a lot of us got to walk through, and we made money off of white guilt, reparations, let's call it. Yeah. But, now what we're seeing is the backlash. And Black people always have to be ready for the backlash.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Obama goes into office and all of a sudden the backlash is Trump. Yeah. For every step we take forward, we take 2 steps back. So now we had this wonderful moment during what we in fashion call the reckoning, where companies were talking about racism and they were talking about Black people, and they were actively, and the 15% pledge happened. And all of these things happened that were like put in place. Black people became, because it's not just about using Black models, it's who's shooting the ad. It's who's
doing their hair,
who's doing the makeup. For years when I was in fashion, both as a model and as a stylist, there would be times when I would be the only person of color on the set. Wow. I'd walk to these companies that employed like 100, 200 people. And if I wasn't there that day, then there would be no Black person there because they didn't have a Black person on staff. Wow. I was privy front row to white hair and makeup artists telling Black talent that they didn't have the colors to do them, or they didn't know how to do Black hair and Black makeup. Wow. And those Black models would get sent home.
Yeah.
not the talent that didn't know how to do their job. The Black model would be the person that got sent home.
Crazy.
I saw that hundreds of times during my career.
Crazy.
And those stories still happen to this day.
Yeah.
And now I think that we're past this point. Now we're at the point where we're banning Black books. We don't want to do African studies in school. We're going backwards. And I think it is because we came forward in that accelerated moment during and after the pandemic. And now we're going backwards because some white people do not want to see advancement for others. And so they saw us move forward. They saw us step through doors we weren't welcomed in before. And now they want to close those doors. And they're trying to do it legally, and they're trying to do it through the government. And
I think, unfortunately, that is so pervasive. I definitely experienced it in my industry. When I was, a resident, I had so many adverse experiences that ultimately were just about keeping me down and pushing me back. So I think that unfortunate disease is pervasive in every industry, or at least that's my experience. And obviously it, correlates with your experience as well in modeling. So it's unfortunate, but, all we can do is take day by day and keep voicing our truth and doing what we can, if not for ourselves, then at least for the people who, come after us, just as the same way that people who came before us paved a path. We have to keep on paving, right? Now, you were represented by different agencies. So let's shift a little bit and talk about the business end of it. Did you learn different aspects of business and how to run your personal brand from each of the agencies? Or was there one agency that taught you more about how to rep yourself?
Model agencies are not here to teach a model how to be self-sufficient. In fact, they want you to be dependent upon them.
Wow.
They want you, they don't want you to be smart financially, right?
Right.
That business runs at a loss for the model. So often it's even basic. It's like you sign with an agency and you go to a new city and you end up in model housing, and the model housing will be like $1,000 to $1,500 a week because you're there short term. And they're billing your account for that.
Oh, they don't pay up front for it.
Already you're at a deficit, right? You owe them. Yeah, they're paying for you, but they're charging that to your account. FedExes for you to get a job when they send your book around, or they send the cost of your comp and printing that all comes out of it's the same as in the music business. It's like that wonderful moment in pop culture history where TLC sits down and they break down how you could sell like 40 million albums and still make no money and be bankrupt.
Wow,
that's kind of how fashion is. They take 20% off of every job you get, and they take 20% from the client, but they also kill you in fees.
Wow.
Right? So,
it's oppressive.
It's oppressive. And there's never a conversation about like taxes, and there's never a conversation about like money market accounts and investments, because you are an independent contractor at the end of the day. They don't have to have that conversation with you. And also, they don't have time to really have that conversation with you. Agencies usually represent hundreds of models, and there's hundreds of jobs happening each day. So they can't hold your hand and teach you anything. I still, to this day, don't understand financial literacy. And that's because I grew up in a household where sometimes we had money, sometimes we
don't. Yeah.
The example of my grandparents was you work, for 40, 50 years, and you get, and you retire, and you get, your retirement, and you get
your social security.
And that was the way everybody around me lived. Black people weren't talking about buying property. We weren't talking about investments. Yeah, you may have, if you were lucky, owned your home.
Right.
You know what I mean? But that was it. You weren't buying rental and, income property or anything like that. You weren't talking about like, that was a phenomenon that I learned in my 20s when we were talking about investments, but I never heard anything about investments growing up Black. And
Right.
and even to this day, I've made a ton of money my whole life. And to this day, I'm still broke because I have the unique ability to spend to what I'm making.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Actually, just above what I'm making.
Yeah.
So I'm always running at a loss.
Running after it, right?
But, yeah, that business, the business of modeling isn't about the model being smart. It's about the model being pretty. It's about the model being a worker.
So it sounds as if that industry needs, like many others, needs some serious reformation. But let's pivot a little bit and talk about your experiences in a different industry. When did you realize you had this penchant or penchant for entertainment and television and media?
Well, I think part of growing up and being bullied or being othered, you learn how to like talk. You learn how to like adjust to any situation. You're
To survive.
always to survive, and your neck is always up. Your shoulders are always up. You're ready for the next onslaught. And I think for me, part of that was like learning to use humor or learning to use charm to get myself out of situations.
Right.
And then once I was out of that space where I was being bullied, I also learned how to use that charm and that self-effacement maybe to put people at ease, to maybe make people like me more, to make things easier or to break the ice.
Yes. That's a burden, isn't it?
It can be a burden because sometimes you don't want to be on.
Yeah.
I say this a lot in passing, and I say it to my friends a lot. It takes a lot of energy to be the center of the room.
Yes.
And so once you've exploded and been that charming, smart,
scintillating, fabulous, engaging person. Yeah.
You then want to go home and you just want to be alone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You want to go home and you're like, oh, I'm exhausted. Because sometimes you don't want to be that person. Sometimes you don't want to have to be on. Right. But once you open that door and that's what people expect from you, then you always have to be, you always have to be that person. So it is like sort of a double-edged sword. But I learned at a very early age to either shut up and disappear or to turn it all the way on and be the center of attention. There's no almost middle ground.
Right. I think it's an unfair charge that is put upon definitely certain types of people and maybe even entire groups of people or demographics. It's an unfair charge that we have to, or that someone has to be responsible for making the other person feel comfortable with whom we are just as we are. Okay, I may have several letters behind my last name, but that doesn't mean you have to, feel intimidated or whatever, because you're probably still thinking I'm not good enough. And because I register that intuitively, non-verbally, sensually, but not in the sexual term, but in the I sense it, then I have to be like, oh, it's okay. I'm not gonna
right? So much of that is that, right?
Yeah.
So much of that is I talk a lot about onlyness. Because it's benefited me in a lot of ways to be the only, a lot of times you're the only Black person in the room. You're the only Black person allowed in that space.
Yes.
And then the people that are allowing you in that space feel compelled to say to you, well, you're not like other Black people, or you're special. And you think, no, I'm not, because I know 100 people like me. They just didn't have the opportunity that I've been given. And then that also sets us up as the only person. It sets us up to thinking that if another person of color or another woman or another other walks into the room, we're in competition with them because we've been told for so long that we're special, that we're the only person allowed in there that represents us.
Yeah.
You know, I
It's
never
so
want to compete with other Black people for anything.
right.
I
Understood.
want to open the door for them. I want to make it easier for the person that comes in behind me. I want to
It's
hold that door open for you.
it's just absolutely so complex. The whole psychology of, as you say, onlyness, or the psychology of other. That's another book, by the way. I'm just letting you have all these ideas, Marcellas. You have work to do, my friend. You have work to do. Um,
Everybody wants more books. I want a break.
okay, well, you can make it a documentary. You can go around interviewing people. I mean, right? That's interesting. Hello.
I definitely
Now,
want to do more documentaries, that's for sure.
okay, so tell me the story about how you created your documentary about Supreme Models.
So Supreme Models came out in 2019.
Hmm.
My ex literary agent, my first literary agent, the literary agent that changed my life, she
Hmm.
always says that Supreme Models is the book that changed the face of publishing.
Oh,
And I love that because I
why
agree.
is that?
Because before Supreme Models, there was no book like it.
Hmm.
There was no art book,
That's
specifically a photography book that told the story of the Black model in her entirety.
a
That
beautiful
book,
coffee table book. Oh,
it's Supreme Models is stunning. It's a celebration. It's a celebration
gorgeous.
of models. It's a celebration of Blackness. It's a celebration. For me, it's more a celebration of Black women than
Yes,
anything. It's
yes.
also it's a love letter to fashion, and that doesn't have a race on it because fashion
Yeah,
is one of the few places when it's living up to its full potential
of course.
where people of all races, colors, sexuality come together to create something magical, to create
Yes,
something that's beautiful.
and that's
So I
beautiful.
am forever grateful to fashion because fashion in a lot of ways saved my life.
Yeah.
Um, but in 2019, Supreme Models came out. It did well.
Yes.
Um, let's
Super
let's be honest,
well.
it did really well.
It was
Um,
banging. It was epic.
it was epic.
Yes,
It's epic now.
yes.
That's a Precious Lead line when she talks about her career. She goes, "It's epic now."
Yeah,
Um,
I like
uh,
that.
Supreme- I love that. I love that. And the book did really well. And the same literary agent that I spoke of earlier,
Mhm.
and my literary agency, what they would do is they take all the new books that come
Yes.
out and they take them around to talent agencies in LA. And they
Okay.
say, these are the books that came out, and these are books that are available for you to use to become movies,
Yes.
use to become documentaries, use as source material for television shows, yada, yada.
Yeah.
They took Supreme Models out, and everywhere they took it, there was interest in it. Whether it
Oh.
was for to be the basis for a work of fiction based upon a Black model, whether
Hmm.
it was a documentary, whether it was a documentary film or a series, and ultimately um, it became a documentary series. I really wanted it. At one point, it was so difficult to get Supreme Models to happen as a book. I started pitching it as a
Oh,
documentary.
there you go.
So I
Now,
knew that it was a documentary. I knew that the
yes,
story was compelling enough that it could be told in multiple ways.
but you didn't have the documentary until after you wrote the book.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
when did you think you had books in you? When did you think you could really write and have impact with your words and your choice of photography?
I knew I could write as far back as sophomore year in high school. My
Okay.
sophomore year in high school, my honors English teacher, Miss Truesdale, had
Yes.
us write as an exercise. Every Thursday, we had to turn in a journal.
Oh.
And I don't know what the other kids were doing for a journal, but my journal was literally my life. And
Oh.
Friday never failed. The next day, Friday, Miss Truesdale would be like, Marcellas, I need to talk to you. And then she would be like, oh my God, are you okay? Oh my God,
Wow.
what happened at work? oh my God, what's happening next? Oh my God, I need to talk to you. Like it was because I was like a blank slate, right? So I was just using it to vent because I was still this gay kid. I was working full time while I was going to school. I was the breadwinner for my family. So I had all these different things going on. So all somebody giving me a place to talk about it was like amazing for me. And I talked about it. And so she would be like, wait, you got into a fight with your boss at work. What does this mean? And I'd be like, oh, it's fine, blah, blah, blah. Or she would be like, wait, because back then I was still dating girls. And it's like, wait, so-and-so, like, you're dating who? And back then, everybody assumed I was gay. So I was still being bullied just a little bit. And I was using that as a form to get rid of, to explore my sexuality. And so she was like, first and foremost, your journals are beautiful. Your story is beautiful. And she would always say, well, thank you for telling me, thank you for putting this on paper. Yeah. So I knew that I could write because of her.
Yeah.
And so when I came out of high school, I was going to be an English major or I wanted to be an actor. So I knew I wanted to be a theater major, but there was no way I even thought that I could dream of doing that. So my two options were to either be a teacher, an English teacher, or to be a writer. And that's why my major in college was English with a theater minor.
Got it. So you've had some experiences with angels in your life. Miss Truesdale is one of them. Maybe she served as a mentor. Would you say that along the way, whether it was music, media, fashion, Hollywood, modeling, whatever, did you recognize that you had mentors that were actually helping to support you along the way? And who were they, if you did?
I didn't realize that I had mentors until you said it right now, because I didn't think of these people who were being kind to me and opening the door for me as mentors per se, because there was always an exchange, right? Yes. So I would say, let's say that the first person that helped me was, I got my first job in retail at 14. I had to lie and say I was 16, and I was a stock boy. I was a stock boy in a women's clothing store, but I was also the stock boy that would be changing a light bulb, and women would be coming to me and asking me questions. So I was selling things while I was dusting or vacuuming and blah, 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 because when you're the only male in a women's clothing store, they want your opinion. And I'd be like, girl, yes, I love that. You could go a size down. That also comes in pink. Oh, you know what? We just got in a Vaco leather skirt. You should go try that on with that Norma Kamali. And Heidi Sherwin, this little Jewish woman who was like 4'11", and she was the manager of the store. She saw that and she was like, get off that ladder. I'm making you a salesperson. And she literally gave me this opportunity, and I took it, and I made money. And it was the first time that I saw that, that my opinion mattered, that I was good at something, that there was no rhetoric around my gayness or my talent.
Right.
And so she opened the door. And there was a Black woman that I worked with there. Her name was Muriel, and we rode the bus together. And Muriel led by example. She had a boyfriend. She lived with her mother, but she took care of her mother, and she would talk to me about relationships, and she would talk to me about dreams, and she would tell me, you're so cute, you can do anything you want to do. What do you want to do next? And I always think back to Muriel and Heidi in that pivotal 14 to 17 range, where I was like a freshman going into my sophomore year in high school to even graduating from high school. I was still working with those women and how they changed my life. Then, of course, Marie Anderson making me a model. Along the way, there were, people who hired me for jobs and allowed me to come in late or leave early or be a diva. And they thought that was funny. And, they celebrated my bad behavior. And, there was a woman named Corinne that worked in restaurants, and she hired me. I knew her socially, and then she owned a couple of restaurants, and everywhere she went, there was always a place for me on the staff. And I would, come and make money. And then I'd be like, I'm going to Paris. And then I'd come back, I'd need a job. And she's like, okay, when can you start? And then, I'd be like, I can't come to work today. I've got a booking, and she'd be like, all right, you have to make this day up, But there was always a space for her, and she like loved and supported me, even when I wasn't working, I'd be like, I'm not working. I need extra shifts. She'd be like, okay, let's figure it out. So there was always people like that along the way that have, I think I call it a trade-off, right? Because they're getting something out of my ability to like turn it on, right?
Yes.
But they are also
it's an exchange.
It's an exchange. And they are in fact mentors, when I think about it. They are like people that maybe I'm not learning from them by example per se, which I think is what a mentor is, but they are putting me in a position where I can flourish.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Marcellas. I mean, oh my gosh, I think there has got to be a way that you and I could do something together, talking, interviewing, just keying on another level, like TV, something. We're going to do it. I'm going to pitch it.
Well, we were so good on the Meredith Vieira show.
Hello. And you and I had, right? You and I had never met before, and we just had this chemistry. And it was like, oh no, this or that. It was just like, how could they not create a show for us? Oh my gosh.
One episode was the thing about eyebrow transplant, which I was like, yes. And then, but then there was, I think there was an episode where.
There was a question about would you spend it or not spend it? What was it worthwhile? And then you said no about something. I looked at you. I was like, yes, spend it. A moisturizer or something, worth it or not. I was like, spend it.
But it was always like you were the clinical, like sort of rational. Yes. I was the one that was always like, do it, yes. Like, and then there was Nigel, who was like the perfect straight man for both of us, because he would be like, I don't know what these crazy people are doing here, but
it was fun. It was fun. We must do it again. But what we will be doing again is part 2 of this podcast. So our listeners have been privy to part 1, and they'll just have to come back next week for part 2. It's been such a pleasure and simply divine fun, but we'll be back. You've been listening to part 1 of the Forever Fab podcast with my fabulous guest, Marcellas Reynolds. Stay tuned for part 2.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Forever Fab, the podcast on fashion, the art of living, and all things beauty, curated by Dr. Shirley Madhere, MD. Live beautifully and help make the world a more beautiful place.